Okay. So, hi everybody. How's everyone doing? Good. Well, thank you so much for coming. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, initially about 50 people signed up for the Games for Peace Building conversation, and this room does not hold 50. So I'm actually quite thrilled at the intimacy of this setting. My name is Derek Kalin. I'm an independent games developer and a specialist at the Peacetech Lab. And this is my colleague, Jacob Lefton.
Hi, I'm with Build Up, a social enterprise at the intersection of technology, peace building, and civic engagement. And we run the Build Peace conference, at which we've hosted discussions about games. We helped out with the Peace app competition, and Derek ran a games workshop for us last year.
Yeah. So I was particularly happy to get Build Up in the room because they've done so much work and so much thinking about games. And really, my hope, our hope with this little workshop that we have for the next 45 minutes is to bring a lot of different people who have worked with games for peace building and try to, there are so many people who have heard about games but haven't yet been exposed to the potential that exists with games yet. Like, they haven't been exposed to the changes that have been happening in the game space with the democratization of game-making tools and the increasing creativity with which people are making games that have social impact. So my goal is to make sort of a list of how games can be used to achieve social impact that will be helpful not only to people in this room, but also the peace builders outside this room who are used to traditional forms of media to get their work done. Right? So the people in USIP and the broader peace building community in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Right? So in the interest of time, just because I know we don't have too long, I'll define the goal. Our goal is to talk about how games can scale peace building. And specifically, I threw out an email to most of the people who came here. It's a series of questions. How can we deepen the impact of peace builders? How can games bring more people into peace building, both as creators of peace building content, but also as consumers of it? What are the ways that social impact games can generate revenue, which is, absolutely essential for us to be continuing to do our work over and over and over again and over the long period of time, and do it on nothing, right? And games have been figuring out how to achieve this entertainment and revenue increase. So, there's a series of questions. This is all in a hackpad, by the way, and this is the short code for the hackpad. So if you want to use this as a resource for yourself after this session, please do. Also, while we're talking, I encourage you to throw open the hackpad and add some notes on your own. This is like a community document, and you'll see the changes as they happen up here. So that's enough of us talking, and really the point is to get a conversation happening. I thought just very briefly I'd give an example of what I'm hoping that we have. The idea is you have a sentence, games can, and then list an impact and maybe an example. And feel free to deviate from this if you want. But games can, for example, crowdsource the examples of problem solving, right? So an example for this is products like Foldit, or a new effort called MMOS, Massively Multiplayer Online Science, where people are getting a large community of gamers together, working together a scientific problem into the game so that the way that the player interacts with it is actually a fun mechanical puzzle to solve, and then taking those findings and actually drawing them into the world of science. So those are two examples, and maybe we can hold that format.
And my example is games can build empathy. So this is a game made by my friend. I know it's an analog game. It's called 14 Days, but basically it puts you in a position of someone who has migraines. So you have a daily planner, and you attempt to accomplish your goals while migraines randomly pop up and make it difficult for you. And so it's a two-player game, and you work with the other player to discuss what's going on in your life in this game setting. And it's designed to give people an idea of what it's like to live with chronic pain.
So In addition to the people in this room, I also wanted to extend a special invitation to a couple of people who are actually not here, and I wanted to take the chance to highlight the great work being done by peacebuilders and practitioners, several people. So right now on the line we have three people. Alan Gershenfeld from Eline Media, who's based in Arizona, and you might have seen Eline's work with Never Alone at Games for Change earlier. Nino Nanitashvili, who has been applying Minecraft in Georgia and Abkhazia to bring youth together there. And then Sabrina, a good person, a friend of mine who is working on a Games for Peacebuilding project based out in California. So we have California and Georgia in time zones here, and I'm eager to give them both a chance to talk. Alan, since you're on the left on the screen, do you want to start first?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Can everybody hear Alan? I'll pump up the volume. All right.
So I'm Alan Gershenfeld. We're a developer and publisher of games and game-based programs that engage, inspire, and empower across both consumer channels and more purposeful learning channels. I guess my sentence would be, games can help humanize the other across political and cultural conflicts, especially if they can reach a critical mass of millions of players and change the cultural dialogue.
So what's an example of that, Alan?
Well, you mentioned Never Alone, which was a game that we developed bringing some of the world's best game makers, the guy who ran the Tomb Raider franchise and other big franchise, together with Alaska Native elders, writers, and storytellers, to help reframe how people basically view Alaska Natives, but indigenous peoples in general. Not a game about the Alaska Native people, but really a game made with the Alaska Native people. And we've managed to reach over 2.5 million people who've downloaded the game. We've gotten a lot of press, and we've helped, in a small way, change the perception of a people's by working very closely with them. I think that can be focused very much across political conflicts or cultural conflicts, especially where entire groups of people are either not represented or misrepresented.
And for the record, I played Never Alone with my wife, and it's actually really fun. It's a platformer, two-player if you want, and my wife played as the fox, and she enjoyed it. So, thumbs up.
Thanks. I mean, the other thing we did with that game, just very briefly, is we actually shot 40 hours of documentary footage, and instead of collecting gold coins or things that you do in a typical puzzle platformer, you actually unlock short documentaries where you can actually see folks from the community talking about the community in a way that's relevant to the game and the entertainment experience.
Nino, I want so full credit to Nino, who's actually calling us. It's the middle of the night in her time zone, so I appreciate you making the effort.
My pleasure. So I'm Nino. I'm living in Georgia, the country. And starting from last year, I've been involved in peace-building actions by using computer games and network games. If I may add, I would say that games can teach perspective-taking. And example of this is the game that we developed. It's called Peace Park, where you have to make sure that everyone in the park is happy, and to do so you have to realize that there is no one side in the conflict or in any situation. You have to make sure that everyone does get their interests met, and that you really try to get into the shoes of every person. So that would be my example, and I guess we can then discuss other issues, because I know.
So the work that Nino did with Peace Park is fantastic, and also I encourage you to look up the project that she did with the Games for Peace methodology, which, if you don't know, Games for Peace originally started out in Israel and Palestine, where an Israeli NGO is bringing together youth in a digital space, having them collaborate in Minecraft before interacting face-to-face, right? So it's kind of the same philosophy as what you might find in like sports diplomacy. Like, the idea is that you get two people from different groups, get them interacting under a new set of rules that sort of form the basis for them humanizing each other, getting to know each other, and then hopefully that also develops into a full relationship. And Sabrina, what is your games can example?
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Sabrina Petrovaruti, and I'm representing the Peace Superheroes team. We're basically an very much early stage startup, looking at developing a digital game app using Peace Superhero characters that would basically take the player. We're looking at 9 to 11-year-olds playing with us through a series of challenges or conflict-based scenarios where they will obviously transform the conflict, resolve the conflict, and continue to move into more difficult, scenarios that represent their everyday lives. So try to bring fun into the gameplay, but also an educational component. So we're working with a team, is 3 of us, that we're across the globe as well. So we're all kind of working through time zones. And as I said, we're basically doing the prototype right now, working on the prototype. We have a team that counts college students who are very much interested in supporting our project. So currently we are basically working on that. So we're hoping to at least be able to release a prototype in the next few months that we can continue to show what our intention is, and hopefully get funding to develop the actual game. We actually were recognized by UNALC last year, where we presented about this idea. So we were very much won an award on innovation, and we presented at Build Peace conference. So we're hoping to continue to build on that and get it out there. I guess our intention is to be able to work with different stakeholders and the community, and do some good work with kids.
Well, thank you, Sabrina. I love. So Sabrina and her colleagues aren't coming at this from a games designer's perspective, or at least they are peace builders who actually identified a goal of they want to engage with youth, they want to make education of certain peace building processes entertaining, and it's been very interesting to talk to them throughout their experience, because they're confronting a lot of the challenges that I think a lot of peace builders would face, like who develops it? How do you decide if something's fun? How do you build something if you have a tiny budget for production, right? So to the online folks, thank you so much for contributing on that end. I'm eager actually to pick the brains of people in this room and to see what people have seen that is interesting, what they want to highlight about games for impact, and see if we can tie that in some way to games for peace building principles. So does anybody have suggestion? Yes, sir.
Sure. So.
And by the way, everybody has mics over here. If you can activate your mic, I'm not sure how easy it is. You might just, you turn it up and press the button. Yeah.
That works. So for me, I'd say games can open dialogues, and my example there was the game Life is Strange, a story about a girl who moved to Portland to join the art school, kind of the trials and tribulations. Just a couple weeks ago, I was at the Indiecade, and I started talking about the game with this other random guy I met, and suddenly it was like 4 or 5 20 and 30-something-year-old guys talking about their experience playing as a teenage girl and how harrowing that must be in its own ways.
Yeah.
And that's just a really fascinating outgrowth of what is kind of a flawed game in some ways, but in other ways it's really impactful.
That's the one with time travel, right?
Right.
So if I remember right, you go through into a conversation not really knowing what the right answer is or how to respond to it, and things can go well, or more often they can go very poorly. And then you can rewind through time and now come in saying the exact right thing, or it kind of allows people to do something that was a personal fantasy of mine in high school, where you could know the right thing to say at the right time to accomplish your objectives. That's awesome. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I'm actually not in the gaming industry, but I'm more of a content creation guy. But has there been any attempts to kind of create let's say, an impact game through a crowdsourcing kind of forum, and particularly where you're using virtual communications, because we've got colleagues here in Georgia and in Arizona, California, of collectively coming. In other words, it's almost like going directly to the audience rather than a bunch of guys and girls sitting around and saying, hey, this would be a cool idea, let's develop this, and you throw it out there, and either it works or it doesn't work. That if you come up with an idea and you kind of have an open forum, where through like a virtual platform like, well, Skype only has a few users, but imagine where maybe anyone could pop in, or Google Hangouts, or their platforms could have even more users. You maybe have an open session where people could kind of anyone in the world could offer an idea, and you might come up with some really cool ideas. Some poor kid idiot might come up with a great idea,
Sure.
if he knows that this kind of open forum is there. Has that ever kind of been tried as a way of developing? And then you kind of go back to the audience and say, okay, this is the way it looks, this is what do you think, and you can kind of get real-time data as to whether that idea that was crowdsourced to begin with during the actual beta process is you continue to crowdsource it, so you have an idea as to whether this is going to work or not.
So are you asking about the process of crowdsourcing an idea or crowdsourcing of production?
Both. Both, and because if you want to have impact, and if the goal, and this isn't going to be like a commercial idea, right? Because the whole idea is peace building. But if people know that they can join the forum during the sourcing and then the development of the idea, and then even when you're beta testing it, kind of are starting to work with the audience from the beginning.
So does anybody have an idea for that one? Does that strike any chords? First thing that comes to mind for me is the process of a game jam, in terms of democratizing the creation of games, and maybe you've encountered that before.
Yeah.
So in that case, the idea is to have a prototype, not to have a fully conceived, fully ready games project. It's usually something that's cobbled together in the space of 5 or 6 hours.
Right.
Doesn't quite get to the bottom of what you're saying, where like anybody can produce a game, right? But it does lower the barrier of gloss and polish that is necessary for us to consider a game. Usually the idea of a game jam is to just launch a concept and get it off the ground.
Right, but rather like a hackathon, right?
Right.
I'm saying it's more like a long-term hackathon, that you're harnessing virtual communications or virtual platforms. You can have multiple users checking in, whether it's through texting or audio or video, and not only the conception but also the development, and then even when you're actually getting into a first year product. I'm just wondering if this has been tried. It's kind of an interesting idea that that the audience itself has some stake in what's created, and I know it's a little threatening to developers.
So there's a platform called Steam Greenlight, for example, which is it's through the Steam. I don't know. It's like a
marketplace.
Yeah, it's a marketplace.
Yeah.
Basically, developers bring games to this marketplace, and they, in some places, they can get games greenlighted and by a crowdsourced group who votes for them. So then the Steam platform will bring that game onto the marketplace, and sometimes they're in alpha or beta, and they can open up their release to a group of dedicated players who might pay a reduced rate or get early access for free to it. And so there can be an ongoing conversation between developers and players, and you can see in some games where they'll make a decision and the players will respond positively or negatively, saying this particular decision broke the game for us, and it's no longer fun to play, or this decision was great and it makes the game really fun to play.
What's interesting about that to me is, okay, this is something that ordinary developers are doing anyway in game design. Like you're constantly testing your assumptions. You don't make a game saying, I know what's fun. You have to go out and actually see if your audience thinks it's fun, right? That's one step. Is there a way that you could go even further and just say, like, okay, we're a game design company, we're going to make a game, and it will be like explicitly created through like the objectives, the content, the story, what have you, the music will all be created through our user base. I haven't seen that happen, but that would be an interesting experiment, and maybe something worth it, especially if participatory design is the idea. And is that online, Alan?
Yeah. What one thought on that? I mean, there's a continuum there. Games that are emergent communities that propagate to millions or tens of millions often have an impassioned community, and the game itself has tools to modify it, to mod it, to adapt and extend it. And while that's not necessarily at the very dawn and creation of the idea, which is a little more complex, I do think there's analogs when aspirational communities, whether it's a Minecraft or a Space Engineers, and there's many examples, can adapt and extend the franchise in very powerful ways. It often deepens, it grows the community, it deepens the impact, and obviously has great commercial potential, but I think the same thing can be applied in the impact space.
Absolutely. I want to jump off of that to try to broaden it some more, even though it sounds like it's something we could drill down into for quite some time. Does anybody else have an idea? Yes, sir.
So one of the most interesting types of games to me personally are games that have open, persistent worlds that is completely player-driven. For example, the best example is usually EVE Online is an example of this. EVE Online is extremely unique in that the economy is so player-driven that economists actually look at it sometimes just to study it because it models real-world economies so well. It's just supply, demand, scarcity of resources. And not only that, it also incorporates diplomacy, where you have huge alliances, huge wars going on. Just so many different social things can be kind of simulated in these games. And it's completely player-driven. The developers don't have to do anything to make this stuff happen. It just happens because it's a system that implements scarcity and territory.
So there, provide opportunities to practice diplomacy is one. What was the other? Economies, yeah. So simulate real-world environments.
People have gotten to the point where they're making so much EVE money in such an efficient manner that they actually sell their EVE, the online currency, for real money. And they're making a living off of it.
So for those people who haven't seen the stories that come out of EVE, they are so good. Just entire stories of like people stealing $50,000 worth of like man hours put into buying these massive spaceships. There's
a spaceship in the game that takes over a year to build.
Right.
That's how crazy these games are.
Right. And on a serious note, I mean, like it's no joke that these games simulate diplomacy. Like one of like we all know that Chris Stevens died in Libya in Benghazi. Some of the other staffers who died on that day, one of them was actually a major force in EVE Online. His screen name was Vile Rat. Beautiful name. But his main role inside this online universe was actually being the primary diplomat for a guild of online players. All this is to say that like these are real skills that get practiced, and it means a lot to people. And if games can provide a fictional setting for people to exercise those skills, it's certainly worthwhile to explore their impact elsewhere. Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing to jump on, just because the multiple comments thus far have been sort of the how do we become more inclusive, how do we get stakeholders involved, and things like that.
Ooh, Mike, by the way.
Sorry. So I'm Eric Brown. Eric Brown worked on a project called Peacemaker, video game about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is now out on mobile. If you would like to check it out as well. I mean, one of the things there, I guess, is just there is inclusion of people to make them have some interest in your project, which is sort of critical when you're going to do any modeling of conflicts. So, I mean, obviously, we went on and talked to lots of people to build a narrative around them. The fear of making all of those things very open-ended is if you're building things to model conflict, there's very acute sensitivities and things like that. So, I mean, part of what you're doing is, well, it all depends on the type of game and the environment. But lots of people ask us why our game wasn't multiplayer. The job of the game designer in some cases is to take those meetings and that information you're getting from the community that you go out and engage, and you're crafting it into a story or an experience for somebody else, and that's the skill that you as a game designer bring, and that's not necessarily something that a group can't do, but that's sort of, it is not a simplistic skill to be a game designer and to take narrative and take experience and make it into something that somebody else can experience. One of the things that we did by having it not be multiplayer is it also they're great examples of games being played together, or game experiences or game things facilitating dialogue or engagement between people that can be very positive, but when you're making the subject matter, in our case, about the actual conflict, you want it to not become a game of conflict between people when you don't want to distort narratives by allowing somebody else to distort the gameplay or the perspective of others and things like that. Right. So there's lots of layers above and beyond that where, like, I agree, and those are great in terms of learning some skills. I think crowdsourcing and involving your audience in the creation of the game is important, but as it goes to conflict resolution, always having your community involved if you are not a practiced practitioner in facilitated dialogue between heated people is also a dangerous space as somebody who is not that to involve in your game experience because it could go awry.
So I appreciate bringing this up because one of the big questions, the two that we had in here were like, okay, games designers who are interested in having social impact, there are a lot of peace builders in this room who don't necessarily have any focus on games design. What peace builders, what would you tell a game designer, like, this is a principle that you need to keep in mind? And on the other end, games designers, peace builders might walk in and say, oh, we'll make a game about that, which should be easy. No, it isn't maybe necessarily. What is one thing that you would tell a peace builder? So I'll leave that open, and whoever wants to jump on it can. Man in the back?
Yeah, one of the things I find with the whole community is it's a self-selecting group that turns to gaming as a resource. And then there's...
Are you coming at it from the peace builder perspective, or...?
Both. It's both ways.
Okay, great.
Because what happens is you end up with a group of folks who have a commonality and an understanding of what you can do with a game. And those in gaming who have gone through the exercise, and it's not like, oh, I have a great idea and I do a game. I mean, there's a process of how do you validate that you're going to end up at the end of the day with your goals met. I mean, it could be wide open because you want that input, but you have to have a facilitator getting to the end state.
So you're saying that the takeaway there is that it's not enough to have an idea, it needs to be validated by the alternative community, whether it's a peace builder going one way or a game design. Yeah.
Exactly. So whether, like in gaming, using it in education, you have to have someone who's skilled in curriculum development to say you're going to get from A to B in a valid, and you can validate that. And the other thing is I see myself as the only reason I understood gaming at all is I was always the extra player when my kids were doing multiplayer games in the basement, so we needed someone to come in and play, and then that graduated to online gaming and understanding where they came from. And when they first talked about gamification, I'm like, you just made that up. But I mean, understanding the intergenerational opportunities that you can then share things that I don't think face-to-face are easily done. And I think if you can do that, this way generationally and this way in terms of inclusion of both sides, I think you can.
That's a really good point.
So going back to your first question, and then next one about principles. So game I think all of us agree that game can bring people together beyond borders, beyond social issues, cultural differences, conflicts. But when we're talking about principles and connect game design to peace-building projects, one of my main questions always has been digital games are somehow more popular among male participants. And girls or young women, I don't know the statistics, probably in Western countries, you see more and more female game players. But in some of the countries that we would like to address issues, there are less female game players. So what is the principle? When we're designing a game, how should we take into consideration factors that would engage girls and women more than before? Mm-hmm. What is that golden formula that we haven't used in it, or maybe some of you have already used it?
So I want to touch on a couple of points. One of them is, I believe the statistic just came out that at least in the United States market, women surpassed men as game players. in the last couple of years. So more than half of the market of gamers is women. And that includes everything from Facebook games to console games to computer games to mobile games. It's the whole spectrum. So we're talking about a really broad range of engagement. And then the other thing, I was about 6 months ago.
That is, sorry, in the U.S.
In,
right?
It is.
I can only assume it's in the U.S. Because that's the community that I pay attention to. I don't know what it is in the rest of the world, but I assume that there are lots of women who play games or would be interested in playing games. And for me, kind of the golden rule about games when I think about them is that the design of them is to incentivize interesting behavior. You basically, when you sit down to create a game, you say, I want to create this kind of experience for people. How do I get them to feel what I want them to feel as they pass through this? And every step along the way, as you're building mechanics, you assess those mechanics against, and the narrative and everything, against those core emotions and feelings that you're attempting to build. And so the idea is, what are the core emotions and what are the core feelings that we think young women want to feel and engage in? What type of games would they want to play? Can we develop games for them that help to further the peace-building goals as well?
I'd add on to that, and I'd be interested in hearing. Like, I bet there are a couple of reactions, so I'll be brief. There's a lot of exploration, again, domestically, about different spaces and how sex and gender make different spaces more or less approachable or open depending on who you are, right? Like a lot of games designers, a lot of games design companies are made up predominantly of men, and a lot of women depicted in games are not depicted in, like, they're presented as sexual objects or they're one-dimensional characters that are not necessarily engaging. And the spaces where women have come into play and have been more comfortable are in the areas that don't treat women as an afterthought, but just as, ordinary players of games who have, like, legitimate interest to cater to themselves, right? So my takeaway is that games are not fundamentally a male or female, they're not a gendered activity. They are instead something that the designer needs to consciously design for all audiences, right? And potentially they could be open to anybody. I wanted to get two people over here, Ayan and then Jeremy.
Sure, I was going to say that one thing we tried, this was before smartphones, and we were making mobile games with feature phones, and we were doing work in India. We realized that the boys were hogging the phones and not giving it to the girls, so we added gameplay so that they would actually have to give the phones to the girls as part of it, and we saw that work pretty well. So, I mean, I'm sure there are techniques that that could be done, and that probably much more work has been done since then. But one question, and maybe it's taking it away, but that I do have is, as we're going through this, is, and it was mentioned here that the gamers are a self-selecting community, and it is a small part of the overall population. And as we sit here in the conference talking about scaling peace,
yes.
My question and at least internal worry is how do it's great to encourage independent houses to and all game designers to build games, but is that going to actually get the reach that we want for peace? Or some interesting things I actually saw at the Build Up conference last year was a group I think based in Israel that was using and here we see as well they're using Minecraft and using existing platforms to see how you could build programmatically peace programs within large games that are already adopted. So I just want have a question over here as to how do we think that this how we could take some of these nascent independent games and what do we see as the path to scaling peace with games with that?
Sure. I'd love to go to Sherry, and then potentially we could go back to the games can framework.
Yeah, so I don't have an answer. And regarding girls and young women, I don't have hardcore data, but I've worked extensively, and I worked a lot with Alan. I'll talk about another game in Egypt, Jordan, Indonesia. And I mean, the girls playing games are almost equal, if not increasingly kind of overtaking males. And I think it's because it's such an anonymous setting, and there's no barrier to entry whatsoever. There's complete anonymity. So I think that's a highly encouraging medium. Not just that, in Jordan they have a gaming lab, and the vast majority of the women of the apps that they have these app challenges are young girls. Young, veiled girls are the predominant participants that they're kind of getting from rural villages all around the country. So I feel highly encouraged that this is just the beginning of kind of a platform for young girls to get engaged, not just in playing, but in design and development, etc.
So,
may I ask a question about that? Yeah, because we're focused on North Africa. Was it only in Egypt that you worked, or across the Middle East?
I've worked in a few places across the Middle East. Jordan's got some really interesting, it's kind of a smaller setting, obviously, but they've done some very progressive work in the gaming space.
And this was throughout, you mentioned rural communities,
yes.
Right?
Yep.
In Egypt. So that girls are using this because they can be anonymous, they have the same interest level, right?
Yes.
And,
I mean, I think it varies on game types.
Right,
I mean, there are ones that they're more inclined to play with. You know, I haven't kind of minded it.
were you limited in what you could do because of just network infrastructure, mobility networks, or I don't know how strong they are throughout the country? In other words, it works in Cairo, but it doesn't work in...
The networks are pretty strong. I mean, and it's shocking, you know, how many people have multiple phones. There's a phone in the household, regardless, that they're going to have access to, whether they have, whether it's their phone or not. But the networks are very, very strong, actually, in Egypt. Yeah, they're pretty strong. The other thing I wanted to quickly note, so Alan on the screen, as you mentioned, works at Beeline Media, and I worked with him on a project in Jordan, building a civic engagement kind of serious social game. It's on a Facebook platform. And
Our City, right?
Yes, it's called Our City, and I think the unique thing about the game was it was trying to bridge virtual behavior change and virtual learning with the real world. So as you moved in the game, you were progressed to get offline with one of the partner NGOs and do something in the real world. So it's just the beginning. It was a pilot, but I think there's a lot of potential for gaming to bridge that virtual world with the real world and kind of take youth into places and spaces that they may not have ever entered before by virtue of having that online experience.
So we just have a couple minutes more,
Sorry,
and I'm
can
eager.
I ask a very quick question?
Oh,
I
yes,
can
indeed.
ask later.
So one point that I want to make is that we will have a social hour towards the tail of this, where I would encourage these conversations. And also, frankly, I'd love to continue, like, perhaps even after the Peacetech Exchange, that's another event that I do, Peacetech Summit, where maybe we all meet together in a restaurant or something and continue the conversation around games, because clearly it's just starting now. But because we only have 5 minutes, what I'd like
right there facing the Worth's house.
Sorry, Alan? Oh, sorry. So what I'd like to do is a rapid fire, maybe a couple of more examples of games and examples, because I did give you guys homework, and I'd hate to put all your efforts to waste. And then after that, maybe we can dive into really quickly questions of tools, resources that are available on both sides of the issue. So who has a games can? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to add just I think it's not a games can, but they're larger than video games, and games and play extend throughout culture largely. And if we just think about games as video games in terms of peace building,
yes,
we're really limiting their potential. Especially when you think about emerging markets where they don't have the opportunity to code or video games. So learn game design by kind of making real world games.
I think you have an ally in Jacob there.
That's why.
But I think even the way you approach it was like apologetically, like this is an analog game. It's like that's a ridiculous way to think about games. And I think that if we don't think about playing games culturally at large, then we really limit their impact.
Completely agree. Food for thought. Monopoly, made after a game called Landlord, which was all about the oppressive nature of landlords in the capitalist system, which is why it sucks to play Monopoly for more than 2 hours, because it's all about creeping and stealing wealth. So, food for thought there.
Excellent. Benjamin Stokes, I'm at the American University Game Lab. We have a master's program in game science. I know most people know that. But the reason I wanted to build on what you're saying and the physical digital that was mentioned before, I think games can strengthen the social fabric. And there are a lot of people playing Minecraft, but there are also a lot of people that are building peace by just meeting their neighbors. And so I look at games like Making Money, which I think is a really interesting game. The Knight Foundation funded in Macon, Georgia, to get people across zip codes to come together, to connect and go to local businesses, build the local economy, just find out who else is near you and connect with places and people you might not otherwise. There's actually
That's called Making Money?
Macon, M-A-C-O-N, for the city of Macon, Georgia.
Got
Making Money. It was a great game, a little on the high-end price point, but there are other low-end examples of this. In fact, just this week in Cairo, they're taking a version of the game and thinking about immigrant integration. What does it mean to take different communities and try to get them to meet each other, where you each get a half of the bond, find a person with the matching symbols, and then go to a local business, plus a social media component, take up pictures. This gets to just what you're saying to second that games can be many things.
Do you know the name of that by any chance?
The version that they're making there, it's the International Organization for Migration has been doing testing it with a local partner on like a zero budget. So I don't even know if it has an official name.
Right.
But yeah, there's a crowdfunding effort I can put in.
Yeah. Would you post that in the hackpad? That would be great. Anybody else? Justin.
Intergeneration. Games can cross generations.
Okay. Got it. Oh, thank you.
I'm going to jump in. But just two things. So one, the mobile stats for male-female. Mobile globally is 60% women, 60% women.
Oh, that's fantastic.
58 to 60. So that's a stat there. And then in terms of scaling, I would also say mobile, to answer your question, how do you scale this to reach millions of people? Mobile is really where we would see the future of peace games going for scale. Right now, Bandura, the company they founded, we're acquiring users at 50 cents a user. And so, yeah, it's a lot of money if you want to acquire 1 million users, but 500,000 is the kind of budget that these large, game developers have to work with. So for the I would say games can be like movies, or games can build communities. And those are really two different things. So you've got what Eric was talking about with Peacemaker. I would say Peacemaker is more like a movie, right? It's an individual experience that teaches a lesson. And then for building a community, there's a number of games that are building community, and we're trying to do that with our collaborative games at Bandura. But one example that's unique, this guy who's here at the conference, Rayhan Alawala, he has a couple 100,000 Facebook friends. He essentially gamified his Facebook friend network, where if you add 1,000 of his Facebook friends from around the world successfully, he'll give you a free laptop. And he's actually tiered it. So 500 friends is like a free dinner, 1,000 friends is a free laptop. And so if you become friends with him, you get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who are trying to become friends with you, sending you messages. And a lot of these people are from rural parts of Pakistan that have not experienced the outside world. And what he says is if you talk to them before this experience, they're very insular, they don't know anything about the world. And if you talk to them after this experience, they're extremely worldly. They have given up a lot of their preconceived notions. And so gamifying interaction and building community is something that's super interesting. And if there's any game designers in the room, just in terms of this project, we're trying to take Rayhan's profile and try to create a game around it. And so that's an interesting project to think
it's
about.
Rayhan?
R-E-H-A-N.
That's better than dude. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting guy.
Okay. Awesome. Anybody else have something that they want to throw in? Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, I've got one. I'm going to brag on Justin's Bandura games a little bit.
Yeah,
I
he
think
deserves
games
it.
can teach collaboration skills. And I think well-designed games give people life skills that they can transition and say, wow, okay, I put together a team and we conquered this challenge together, and this game helped us figure out how to do it and gave me approaches that I could use in other contexts.
I love that. Just throwing it out there, has anybody ever played Pandemic? As a board game? That is a great collaborative board game. You have to you and your friends team up to save the world from like a creeping plague virus, and it's fun with the kids. So
yeah, if anybody's ever played Diplomacy, that can teach you how to screw people too.
Actually, so who else I'm curious who else has like good collaborative games to throw out.
You guys have 15 minutes left. Not a collaborative game, but.
15 minutes? Oh, that's plenty of time. That's fantastic. We should talk about tools if nobody else. Jordy? And then tools after that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm from the United Nations Alliance of Civilizations, and I'm glad to see that Sabrina, who's one of the winners of the Peace App that we did last year.
Yes, indeed.
It's here. Now, I have a question. I think that games can also question your identity. And in that sense, kind of enriches you individually and creates empathy, as saying. So I think that's important. One question that I have is about scaling up and building relationships with other communities and with sometimes conflicting communities. How do we deal with language? And I would like to hear about the experiences of like different communities speaking different languages, and we build this gaming platform that allows them to communicate and to engage with each other. So there's any experiences about language in gaming?
I want to quickly jump in. Language is such a difficult thing, but good game design means you're building a game that doesn't require any language whatsoever. So a really good game can be understood by the players pretty much intuitively. And then, what we're doing with a chat is building an emoticon-based chat. And so, these little symbols are becoming recognized globally. And so that's one example. I'm sure there are other examples that people have ideas for how to bridge that.
Yeah, in terms of another major example of that, I think Journey does a very good job of. The only button you have is a little ping noise, but that's all you have, and it really works for talking to other people. In terms of collaboration and building skills, there's this interesting case study of this insomniac somewhere in the Midwest who was playing World of Warcraft at the most obscene hours, and he ended up finding his way into this Icelandic guild, and all of them can't speak English, and he can't speak their language. And within about a month and a half, they were communicating back and forth in their native language, saying, it's like, we need to flank that guy, we need to go this way, we need to go that way. And it's just building those systems through that way as well.
One thing, I think I want to move a little bit, sidestep into what sorts of tools are there what are out there, what are resources that help people get over technical hurdles in making games, because one of the difficulties with making a solid game is that you need a lot of technical expertise, but there's a lot of platforms and tools that will help with putting together simple games or more complicated games, but also publishing games like Kickstarter and such. So one thing that I want to talk about is there's a platform called Twine, which is a text-based platform that basically you construct cards that are linked together, and you can program simple relationships between them and create variable structures. And there's, going back to the idea that games can challenge identities, there's an entire community of indie game developers who work in Twine and create text-based games that are very much about self-expression. So these games aren't necessarily, for me, scaling up the people playing them, but they're scaling up the people who are making games as a system of self-expression using simple tools that I like.
Yes.
So if people have other examples of tools that are out there, it could be good to help us compile a list.
Do you also have any suggestions for tools or platforms that are more suitable for lower internet speed connection?
There's, I don't know how Scratch is. It's a visual programming. You can probably download it and then build a game offline.
Yeah. Scratch is an interesting tool. Oh, Alan, you have feedback there?
Yeah, on that point, one site to go to, we co-run with Sesame Workshop, the Joan Gans Cooney Center, something called the National STEM Video Game Challenge for Youth. It was actually announced at the White House 5-6 years ago. We've been running it for 6 years. That site profiles a number of tools like Scratch, GameStar Mechanic, all the way up to Unity, as well as paper-based game design. To me, there's a pathway there that can start as early elementary school all the way up to middle school, high school, young adults and beyond, and can go from game design to game programming to game art. And the key is that there's a number of tools depending on what stage you are, what resources you have. And I think one thing that's missing in the sector is helping to guide these different pathways from being a 6- and 7-year-old all the way up to a college student, knowing the right tool at the right time. But that's a good resource because it at least profiles a number of tools that we offer when we do this national game design competition.
Alan, that's fantastic. What's the name of that resource again?
The National STEM Video Game Challenge. If you Google that, I think that the site is stemchallenge.org. And we actually are bringing this to countries around the world. And I think it's a blend of collaboration, competition. Sometimes having a national competition creates a structure by which many local programs can coordinate their programs with a sort of capstone project to enter for a national challenge.
That's a really good resource. I'm happy to hear about that one. Throwing it out there, I talked to several people who are looking at using repurposing SMS tools as game platforms. So, like, I don't know if you've played around at all with, like, things like EngageSpark or Telerivet. The idea is that a lot of pollsters want to get custom data from people using smartphones or even feature phones. They just send out a text message to somebody, ask them a question, and then can pull in feedback. I've seen a couple of people and had a couple of conversations with people who are looking to use a text message system as a very simple, like, choose your own adventure game through SMS. It's a cool concept.
An actual technology for that. Twilio partnered with something called OpenDBX. Is a free tool that can then use a whole phone system and can scale. Speaking of scaling, where you don't have to handle any of the phone side. It's a great way to do prototyping. You can prototype voice trees, prototype auto SMS responses.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And it's all just install it server side. DreamHost has a one-click install. So there are some tools out there that are just straight SMS, but people don't think of them as game tools. There's like no game community around this, but it's a cool tech tool. Similarly, like the Raspberry Pi doesn't support any of the things Alan mentioned, but it's like a super accessible, cheap computer. So it's also interesting to think about training people with some of the tools Alan mentioned, but then making games in Python or whatever language you want. There are actually game libraries for Raspberry Pis that then could work great in a lot of minimal computing environments.
It was Twilio and OpenDBX?
OpenDBX is the front end tool.
VBX, cool.
There's also GameStar Mechanic, came up quite a while ago, which is kind of a game about making games. It teaches you how to make games in a game-like environment. It's all web-based, free to play. There's also a shout out to a local Baltimore company called Breakout, which has an HTML5. It's a game production suite. It's all browser-based. You can design games and code games in there and then launch them. It's still in alpha right now. It should be out in about a couple months. So. And
so these are like, I think of these as like mid-tier. You have to have some amount of code background, right? Really?
Ground up. And same thing with Breakout. I mean, their thing is to teach you how to make a game in the browser for anybody who wants to make games. And then you can build it and put it into Breakout's system in there. So it's
Breakout?
Breakout, yeah. They're a local Baltimore.
I want to say there's Game Salad as well. Yeah, I think that one actually lets you even publish it to mobile and things like that straight from it, and it's not code heavy. It's just it's just.
And going back to analog games, they are a very low impact way to get started in the process of thinking about game design and iterating your games quickly and efficiently, because anything that you can do in a digital space, you can emulate in paper for free, and you don't have to know how to code in order to do it. You just have to know what the rules are in your head and write them down. And so you can just iterate these things really quickly. It doesn't work, throw it out, try it again on paper, and then you can put that in digital later if you need to.
What was that game that you shared with me, the pastoralists, migration patterns?
Oh, it's called Ermat, and I forget, it's either Kenyan or I'm gonna.
I think it's Kenyan.
Yeah.
But we could be wrong. I'll update the hackpad on that.
But it's basically a board game that teaches herdsfolk about how.
5 minutes left.
Thanks, Gil.
Yep.
About the long-term drought cycles that they'll face over years, and so they can play this game, and then and it's a board game, but it basically teaches them how to recognize the patterns that they'll come into that are very slow when they're happening, that may not look like patterns at that moment. So
I want to bounce off of what Jacob said in terms of doing analog first. When we found out, we did a lot of research with Israeli and Palestinian youth to build our first game, and we found that one of the areas of overlap was they loved these endless runner games. And so Temple Run, one of the most popular endless runners, also is a board game. And we wanted to see if people would enjoy a collaborative version of Temple Run. So we bought 10 copies of Temple Run's board game for $10 each, spent $100, rewrote the rules, and the test went great. And so now that's what we're developing. So for $100, we were able to get a prototype and get it tested. So that's a really fast way of doing it.
Yeah, I have a developer friend who, not in the game space, but in general, he's like, paper prototype, do it in paper long before you touch code, because code takes a lot longer to figure out. Anything else people want to highlight?
I have a question. The thing that you talked about, how many people know about that?
Which thing?
Brinkbit?
Yeah. Oh, well, it was Brinkbit. I was thinking of.
GameStar Mechanics?
Yeah.
It's been out for a couple of years
So
now.
people within the community now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been out for a while. It's not widely used as much as I think it, but it's from the Institute of Play, and they run the. There's school in here.
Yeah, we publish GameStar Mechanics.
Oh, Alan just said he published GameStar Mechanics, or they published.
Yeah. So so it's it's being used. I don't have the
You're in
numbers.
the community, or you're interested in the community. It's a gaming community. In other words, the wider public doesn't.
I want to talk to Alan probably more about that.
Yeah,
that's well. Okay.
I do also want to highlight. Maybe it's kind of obvious to I shouldn't say that. Unity is actually a great platform, and that's how I learned how to make games. And Unity 3D is interesting because it's free, and it can develop for many different platforms. So you can make something for Xbox, to Android, to iOS, to a web browser game. There are disadvantages to Unity, and there's a lot of conversations about those disadvantages. But if you're looking for a powerful tool that is also free, at least for much of the functionality, it's a good thing to look at.
I'll just add Photon is another good tool for real-time multiplayer, and you can get a basic version of that for free as well.
So my question really is like, how do we take all of these room full of gaming experts and actually solve a real-world problem? I think that's how do we create peace through playing games, which I think is a very powerful tool. I grew up as a gamer, and I designed a game, actually produced a game. And I struggle, and I learned how to play football games through designing a game. But I think, how do we solve the peace issue?
Yeah.
And then how do we tackle it on the micro level? That becomes a macro.
So it's a big question. I'd like to offer my own idea and then see if anybody else wants to jump on it. The framework that I found helpful is breaking down games for impact into 3 separate categories: changing knowledge, shifting attitudes, and changing behaviors. So at the very beginning of it, you can inform somebody of a different reality, and that's the basis of a lot of edutainment games. And just by making content facts entertaining, you can get people to engage with them and learn them, right? Attitudes, you could put, like, we have all these examples about empathy building, right? Like, if you can get somebody to actually change the way they feel and react to something, maybe force them to play in the role of a Palestinian leader in Peacemaker, then you get them to shift their fundamental ways of reacting to things. And ultimately, I think where it's really exciting is to see how we can shift behaviors, right? There are games like that are trying to gamify making us more fit and active and exercising people, like Zombies Run, which has made a game out of running away from zombies, and of course, you're running, so that's good for you.
I would say Habit RPG is basically it's attempting to help you build habits and keep a schedule, but it sort of turns the whole process into a little role-playing game where you have an avatar, and every time you accomplish goals, you get experience points and can level up. And so people who really like getting those numbers high and collecting all the little hats and whatever, just have that incentive for them.
is there a way that we can gamify data collection or data processing? Is it time?
It is time.
It's
For an
time.
amazing session back in May.
Okay, so I've been asked to request, beg, plead, cajole that you all go directly into the auditorium afterwards. But from me and Jacob, thank you so much for this. Is a really engaging conversation. I hope we can continue it. Please come and talk to me at some point.
Yeah.
To each other.
And I would love to talk to you as well.
Yes.
Sorry. No, it's fine. That was great.
Well done. Thank you. Good. Hey. So my criteria for oh, one sec. All right, guys. Sorry, I almost forgot about you. Thank you so much for participating, even though I know time zones and distance and probably hearing were a challenge.
Now it's fun. Thanks.
Sure.
So I'd love to follow up with each of you after the fact and get your thoughts on this. Okay. So please shoot me an email and I'll be in touch soon. Okay.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah. Say hi to Sherry, Eric, Ben. Say
yeah.
to all of them.
I will. I'll tell them you say hello.
I'll connect with Derek with the team.
I'm sorry, Sabrina?
I'll connect them with you as a team, as we always do, to catch up on this and all the new stuff.
I'm sorry, there's actually a huge buzz right now.
Don't worry, we'll talk soon.
We'll catch up.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
All right, take care, everybody. All right, bye-bye. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
No, nice to meet you. It's your